Welcome back to the Eric Krown crypto channel, where I'm having massively frustrating technical difficulties during this morning. But you know what? There is plenty more important things to be focusing on and talking about right now. So I wanted to follow up on the short-term time frame analysis and then also kind of bring it into the bigger picture, as we do have a big event coming in tomorrow, actually, for Wednesday, FOMC meeting, and markets will typically, as always, move. So with that in mind, this is all preparation realistically for the next few days to come, and very much likely into the early portion of June. Anyways, with that in mind, I want to humbly request that if you do find this content valuable, the best way to give back is to simply like the video. You can always dislike it later if you happen to just, really dislike it. And with that in mind, let's jump into it right now. So first and foremost, I wanted to call out that the hidden bearish divergence that we are looking at on pretty much all timeframes, I believe, even up to a 12-hour right here on spot price action, have played out, with Bitcoin coming back down to the bottom side of the range. We had actually 1, 2, 3 drives coming off the last few highs right here. And what do you know, Bitcoin back onto the bottom side of the range and really setting up for the next major move out of this overall range here. The range being basically between about 31,500 to the upside versus about 28,500 to the downside. Same old shit that we've been looking at for the past couple weeks here, going back to middle of May, actually. So with that in mind, the question is, what now? What now, as we do reference the next few pieces of data? So in the last 24 hours, the big thing that we were looking at was over here on CME for the daily stochastic momentum. And that was going to kind of judge the overall bias on direction if we did close below the gap fill, which was, I believe, about 29,500. And that obviously did happen over here. So you do see that the CME stochastic momentum has actually turned down officially and will be remaining with downside pressure if Bitcoin does close below about 29,000 bucks again. So ultimately, if that condition is met, I would be, I guess, on breakout or breakdown in this case, watch with targets in mind to the downside, somewhere around, as I bring up my drawing tools over here and go back to CME. There we go. Somewhere around the 1.618 Fibonacci extension from this range. And in this case, that's about your mid $27,000 region. Again, confirmed, or at least I would be looking for that move to extrapolate and populate if we do get a closure basically below the range lows, which again is about mid 28. It's about 28.5, 28.6, depending upon which exchange that you're looking at. And yes, it does, of course, matter. Anyways, other than that, I did want to call out a few more things over here on the short-term time frame. So as long as Bitcoin is essentially below the not the 1.618, but the 0.618 right here at about 29,400, that same sort of gap fill area that we had coming in from yesterday, I do look at this as pressure down, simply because trend. And if we do once again reference stochastic momentum on the short-term time frames, we will very likely notice that, well, it is pressure down right here. We see 12-hour stochastic momentum downside angled as long as below 30,400. 6-hour is going to be showing downside pressure below about 29.8. 4-hour is going to be showing downside pressure below 30,300. 3-hour is going to be showing just straight down below 30,000. And hourly is probably flippy floppy here and going to be turning down yet again with any sort of a closure below 29,100. So what does that likely align with? A little bit short-term sideways here, maybe even test the short-term range highs, which I'd be looking at as about that 29,400-ish region over here. And assuming that Bitcoin stays below there, or assuming that we don't get any, even short-term time frame closures above there, I would be looking for Bitcoin to kind of play on the bottom side of this overall range. And again, dependent upon an actual closure below the range, then I would be increasing those targets to the downside. The problem is, because we do have a big event, or a relatively big event coming in tomorrow for FOMC, it's very difficult to trust short-term time frame technicals. What I like to do in those cases is prepare for like the big bad move, if you will. And so while the downside bias is a little bit greater right now, I should actually let you know over here that the short-term funding rates are actually negative right now. And these have been phenomenally good at getting short-term moves, in fact. So we've been posting them a lot on the Twitter account as of recent times. You can see that it's actually negative right now. So what does that essentially imply? Kind of hard to break down with interest rates like that, as shorts are essentially paying longs to hold their positions. Now, shorts obviously probably happily pay longs to hold their positions as long as they're in profit. And I imagine that that is going to be consistent, especially as long as Bitcoin's below 30. But even in the short term, more downside pressure as long as below, again, that 618, which is 29,400 or so. Technically speaking, it'd actually be the 382, just because right now I'm actually using a bullish trade. It should be a bearish, but that's only because I wanted the extensions over here. Anyways, Fibonacci Nazis are watching, so have to identify that. Anyways, I'll get rid of the LARP lines over here. That one's obviously already played out. And if you actually call back to last Friday's video, this move was the more likely of the moves to be looking at, as we did see CME close below the very critical level that was essentially biased towards another downside direction. So ultimately, the next real big setup is realistically for the end of this week, and maybe even a little bit more likely to be seen in early June in this case. So realistically, again, I want to say that all this is kind of contingent upon what we're going to talk about next, as this one has, the major move, if you will, a 20% move, historically speaking, which I'll bring back on over here. We've seen this chart many times, and we're going to see it yet again over here. This is the daily stochastic momentum versus volatility chart. And anytime that we have seen daily BBWP, which measures volatility, the dispersion of returns, get into, especially below about 10 percentile, the expansion phase from that extreme low, which by the way, we're below right now, actually currently at about 8.33 percentile, has led to an average move of about 20%. And then there's a lot of variance in the amount of days that typically takes, but I'd say probably around about 7 to 14 days is what we do see on average from the expansion. So expansion does not happen until we see at least the BBWP itself get a positive slope, and then preferably above the moving average, which will also have a positive slope. If you see something like that, that would be a really good indication that we're going to see that expansion phase. And again, if you've even been on this channel for the past few months here, you've seen several of these iterations play out, and I believe that we're setting up for yet another one. So the next piece of information is very important for judging the bias on direction, which, if we're looking at a 20% move, we can kind of, gather about where Bitcoin would be headed on that expansion, again, looking for a resolution probably in like early June, if you will. If it comes to the upside, $35,000. If it comes to the downside, about $23,000. Although, technically speaking, we still do need to actually see it expand. So that could change. But in this case, in order to get a bias on direction, we've been using the daily stochastic momentum oscillator right here, which has gotten the right direction on those volatility expansion plays 9 out of the last 11 times. So pretty good hit rate within this case right here. And that goes as far to say essentially that as long as we see it, in this case to the upside, it actually is a little more likely to trade to the upside. Problem is that we're not seeing volatility expansion right now. So if we don't have the volatility expansion component of this present, but only the daily stochastic momentum oscillator, which is upside present, well, you could look at this as a bit of a resetting signal, and we're still very much within the bearish control zone here as well. So the longer that this plays out to the upside without volatility expansion, the more and more likely it probably does actually play out to the downside, with a potential target somewhere around about $23,000, which I imagine is probably also, yeah, it's actually the 3.272 to 3.618 Fibonacci extension back down around here. Anyways, in that case, before I get a little bit too ahead of myself, we will see daily stochastic momentum continue to the upside as long as we're above about 28,150 right here on spot price action, which is what this was back tested for. Obviously, CME is already down, but in this case, it needs to be relevant towards what we've actually tested it on. Here's the thing though, if we do see a downside resolution, even in the short term today, that would very likely bring Bitcoin below that momentum pivot right around here, with an intended target in the mid $27,000 territory. And well, you'd have to imagine at that point, the downside expansion becomes a lot more likely, expanding those targets somewhere down around about $23,000. Again, we don't necessarily have full on data on that just yet, because we need to actually see the volatility expansion, which has not, theoretically happened at the current moment in time. So ultimately, that's really the next big setup that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. And in the meantime, is Bitcoin a little more likely to trade to the downside here than upside? Yeah, if we go off of indicators, but again, coming into an event like tomorrow, the FOMC meeting, I expect, a very wicky price action, kind of similar to what you saw yesterday. In fact, especially if you go over here to the short-term timeframes, all of these ups and downs, we saw like a $500 range get tested, I don't know, it seemed like 5-6 times within the course of a couple hours. We'll probably see some similar to that coming into tomorrow's event, and then resolution. And well, if that does come to the downside, that would actually theoretically make a little bit more sense. But again, if you want the hopium is, as long as Bitcoin remains above this level right here, the upside expansion technically more likely, until we actually see the expansion, which right now, obviously it's still downside angled, and the moving average also just nosediving there as well. So not an active signal as it is as of this current moment in time. So I think that's a good place to leave off here. maybe I just go back to the short-term time frame ranges yet again for a second, just because I don't know if I did these justice for the moment. But basically, Bitcoin can start to close even short-term timeframes above about 29,400. I would be looking for at least to move another couple $100 or two to $300 higher towards 29,650 to 29,700, I would still reserve caution, especially as long as we're below about $30,000 essentially. So, until then, it's as Mr. Burglecut said the other day, it's a fucking range, baby, and it's a beautiful range. If you're a range trader, sell 31 or close to 31, buy 28 or close to 28, or maybe better said about 28.5. Anyways, other than that, I don't really have too much else to say. Again, this is mostly a setup for the next, basically for end of week is what I imagine we start to see this follow through with. Other than that, I should let you know that on Instagram, I've been being more active there. If you're interested in that, the account is in the link in the description below. Be aware that there's a shit ton of scammers there. So if it's any other account but that one, it ain't fucking me. It's not me. And it's probably, they're probably going to try to get you to do all sorts of things like sending hog pics, and or maybe you could get them to send their hog pic, which would be absolutely amazing. Anyways, and then also Bybit. We got a Bybit chill link in the description below as well. As always, when it comes to these and sponsors in general, understand that at least for my moral conscience, I have to say, hey, unless you already have a working strategy that you can back test, which you can do all for free. You can do that on the Krown trading application actually over here in the trading journal, which we also have a link to in the description below, or you can do it on pen and paper, or you can do it on like Excel or whatever you might have. It's very unwise to not just trade not only leverage, but any trading at all, at least in my opinion. And then if you actually do go through the rigorous process of back testing and you actually have good data and statistics that support whatever sort of trade strategy that you're looking for, that would be perhaps the time to consider maybe putting money at risk. Again, if it so fits your desires. Anyways, other than that, I think that's going to do it for today. Again, mainly set up for the next week to come. With that said, wishing you well as always. Take care and see you hopefully soon.